The screams shook the compound that night. A young mother, her face pale with terror, clutched her newborn tightly to her chest as the old landlord, Malam Zubairu, stormed into her room. His eyes glowed strangely in the lamplight, and his voice carried a thunder that silenced everyone. "I told you," he roared, pointing a bony finger at the baby. "No babies in this compound. Did you not hear my warning?" The neighbors stood frozen, peering from their doors, too frightened to speak. The young mother begged on her knees, "Please, Malam, he is just a child. He has done nothing wrong." But Malam Zubairu's hands trembled as though he was battling something unseen. The air grew cold, and in the silence, a strange sound echoed, a low wail, not from the newborn, but from the walls of the compound itself. The baby screamed louder, and suddenly the lamplight flickered, shadows darting like living things across the cracked mud walls. That was when everyone saw it, dark, wet stains sliding down the walls as if the house itself was weeping blood. Gasps filled the compound. The mother screamed louder, and Malam Zubairu fell to his knees, his face drenched in sweat. He whispered words no one had ever heard him say before, "The curse, it has awakened again." No one understood what he meant. No one knew why a landlord would forbid children in his compound. Until that night. Until the truth came crawling out from the very foundation of the house. But to understand how such a strange rule came to be, we must go back to when Malam Zubairu first inherited the land, and when the first tenants came to live in the compound. The village of Umoka sat on the edge of a thick forest where the wind always carried secrets. The people there lived simple lives, trading in yams, goats, and palm oil. Yet, they whispered often about that compound near the Iroko tree, a place people avoided at night. At first, no one thought much of it. Malam Zubairu had returned from the north after many years of trading in cattle. He was respected, tall, with a turban always tied neatly on his head. He spoke with wisdom, and his compound seemed well built, with enough rooms for many families. People thought it was a blessing. But soon, questions began to rise. Families who came with children were turned away. Mothers with babies were told, "Find another place." Widows carrying infants on their backs wept as they were refused shelter. When asked why, Malam Zubairu simply said, "It is not permitted." People wondered but did not press too much. He was old, and old men often had strange ways. Still, the rule seemed unfair. Why only children? Why only babies? One day, a proud young man named Obina, with his Hausa wife, Hadiza, came seeking a room. They had no children, so Malam Zubairu allowed them in. They lived peacefully, planting cassava and rearing chickens. Soon, other couples without children joined, and the compound was filled with laughter of adults but never the cry of a child. At first, it seemed ordinary. But the silence of the compound at night was unsettling. A home without children always feels too quiet. Neighbors in nearby houses noticed this too. "That place is cursed," the villagers would whisper. "What kind of landlord fears babies?" Years passed, and still the rule stood. Then, something happened that no one could ignore. Hadiza, the young wife of Obina, became pregnant. She hid it for months, wrapping her wrappers tighter around her waist, avoiding the landlord's gaze. She told Obina, "We cannot leave now. Where will we go? Let us wait. Maybe when the baby comes, nothing will happen." But something did happen. Strange things began to plague their room. At night, Hadiza would wake to the sound of drums, though no one in the compound played them. She would smell smoke, but there was no fire. Once, she swore she saw a figure rocking an invisible cradle in the corner of her room. Obina dismissed it at first, saying, "It is your mind. You are only tired." But when he too woke one night to see tiny footprints on the wet floor leading toward their bed, his heart froze. Still, they did not leave. They thought they could endure. But as Hadiza's stomach grew larger, so did the fear. They decided to hide the bird from the landlord, but how can a child's cry be hidden from ears that are always listening? On the day the baby was born, the rains fell heavily. The roof leaked, the compound smelled of damp earth, and thunder roared like drums of the gods. The child cried, loud, pure, and full of life. And that was when everything went wrong. The crying did not stop. It grew louder, echoing strangely as though the house itself was amplifying it. Neighbors pressed their ears to the walls, their eyes wide with dread. Then, the walls began to shake. The old Iroko tree behind the compound groaned, its branches snapping in the wind though there was no storm. That was when Malam Zubairu came. His turban was loose, his staff trembling in his hand. He looked at the baby with horror, not anger, but terror. And when the walls began to weep blood, he knew the curse had returned. That was the night no one could ever forget. But what curse was this? Why did babies awaken something hidden in the earth? What had Malam Zubairu done to tie his compound to such dark secrets? The answers lie in the story of how he first got the land. And it is not a story for the faint-hearted. Many years ago, before the first tenant moved in, before the compound even existed, there had been another owner of the land. A man whose greed brought ruin to everyone around him. His name was Namdi, and he was not just a farmer, he was a man who dared to cross the world of the living and the spirits. And it all began with a single night under the Iroko tree. The screams shook the compound that night. A young mother, her face pale with terror, clutched her newborn tightly to her chest as the old landlord, Malam Zubairu, stormed into her room. His eyes glowed strangely in the lamplight, and his voice carried a thunder that silenced everyone. "I told you," he roared, pointing a bony finger at the baby. "No babies in this compound. Did you not hear my warning?" The neighbors stood frozen, peering from their doors, too frightened to speak. The young mother begged on her knees, "Please, Malam, he is just a child. He has done nothing wrong." But Malam Zubairu's hands trembled as though he was battling something unseen. The air grew cold, and in the silence, a strange sound echoed, a low wail, not from the newborn, but from the walls of the compound itself. The baby screamed louder, and suddenly the lamplight flickered, shadows darting like living things across the cracked mud walls. That was when everyone saw it, dark, wet stains sliding down the walls as if the house itself was weeping blood. Gasps filled the compound. The mother screamed louder, and Malam Zubairu fell to his knees, his face drenched in sweat. He whispered words no one had ever heard him say before, "The curse, it has awakened again." No one understood what he meant. No one knew why a landlord would forbid children in his compound. Until that night. Until the truth came crawling out from the very foundation of the house. But to understand how such a strange rule came to be, we must go back to when Malam Zubairu first inherited the land, and when the first tenants came to live in the compound. The village of Umoka sat on the edge of a thick forest where the wind always carried secrets. The people there lived simple lives, trading in yams, goats, and palm oil. Yet, they whispered often about that compound near the Iroko tree, a place people avoided at night. At first, no one thought much of it. Malam Zubairu had returned from the north after many years of trading cattle. He was respected, tall, with a turban always tied neatly on his head. He spoke with wisdom, and his compound seemed well built, with enough rooms for many families. People thought it was a blessing. But soon, questions began to rise. Families who came with children were turned away. Mothers with babies were told, "Find another place." Widows carrying infants on their backs wept as they were refused shelter. When asked why, Malam Zubairu simply said, "It is not permitted." People wondered but did not press too much. He was old, and old men often had strange ways. Still, the rule seemed unfair. Why only children? Why only babies? One day, a proud young man named Obina, with his Hausa wife, Hadiza, came seeking a room. They had no children, so Malam Zubairu allowed them in. They lived peacefully, planting cassava and rearing chickens. Soon, other couples without children joined, and the compound was filled with laughter of adults but never the cry of a child. At first, it seemed ordinary. But the silence of the compound at night was unsettling. A home without children always feels too quiet. Neighbors in nearby houses noticed this too. "That place is cursed," the villagers would whisper. "What kind of landlord fears babies?" Years passed, and still the rule stood. Then, something happened that no one could ignore. Hadiza, the young wife of Obina, became pregnant. She hid it for months, wrapping her wrappers tighter around her waist, avoiding the landlord's gaze. She told Obina, "We cannot leave now. Where will we go? Let us wait. Maybe when the baby comes, nothing will happen." But something did happen. Strange things began to plague their room. At night, Hadiza would wake to the sound of drums, though no one in the compound played them. She would smell smoke, but there was no fire. Once, she swore she saw a figure rocking an invisible cradle in the corner of her room. Obina dismissed it at first, saying, "It is your mind. You are only tired." But when he too woke one night to see tiny footprints on the wet floor leading toward their bed, his heart froze. Still, they did not leave. They thought they could endure. But as Hadiza's stomach grew larger, so did the fear. They decided to hide the birth from the landlord, but how can a child's cry be hidden from ears that are always listening? On the day the baby was born, the rains fell heavily. The roof leaked, the compound smelled of damp earth, and thunder rolled like drums of the gods. The child cried, loud, pure, and full of life. And that was when everything went wrong. The crying did not stop. It grew louder, echoing strangely as though the house itself was amplifying it. Neighbors pressed their ears to the walls, their eyes wide with dread. Then, the walls began to shake. The old Iroko tree behind the compound groaned, its branches snapping in the wind though there was no storm. That was when Malam Zubairu came. His turban was loose, his staff trembling in his hand. He looked at the baby with horror, not anger, but terror. And when the walls began to weep blood, he knew the curse had returned. The tenants fled into the rain, but Obina and Hadiza could not leave. Their baby wailed in her arms, and the old landlord stood shaking as if remembering something too heavy to carry. That night was not just a night of storms. It was the night the past returned to demand payment. But what curse was this? Why did babies awaken something hidden in the earth? What had Malam Zubairu done to tie his compound to such dark secrets? The answers lie in the story of how he first got the land. And it is not a story for the faint-hearted. Many years ago, before the first tenant moved in, before the compound even existed, there had been another owner of the land. A man whose greed brought ruin to everyone around him. His name was Namdi, and he was not just a farmer, he was a man who dared to cross the world of the living and the spirits. One night, he sat under the Iroko tree, whispering to something no one else could see. The villagers passed and heard him speaking, but his words were not in any tongue known in Umuoka. They said he laughed into the darkness, and the darkness laughed back. Not long after, his farmland became the most fertile. Yams grew bigger than a man's head. His goats birthed twins every season. People envied him, but they also feared him. They whispered that no man could have such fortune without giving something in return. And they were right. Children began to fall sick in Umuoka. At first, it was one or two, then many. Babies would cry in the night and never wake in the morning. Mothers wept, fathers tore their clothes, and the village square was filled with mourning songs. Yet, Namdi's farm prospered more than ever. When the elders questioned him, he smiled strangely and said, "The gods bless those who know their ways." But the truth was darker. Namdi had made a pact with something beneath the Iroko tree, an ancient spirit that fed on the cries of infants. As long as babies wept, his fortune grew. And when the villagers discovered this, it was already too late. The land itself had drunk too much of the children's cries. Years later, when Namdi died suddenly, no one wanted to inherit the land. The villagers left it empty, calling it Ola Ohomio, the land of the evil spirit. Grass grew wild, the Iroko tree stretched its arms wider, and for a long time, no one built there. Until Malam Zubairu came. But how he came to own the land, and why he made that strange rule of no babies, is a story that begins with his own secret journey into the forest one night. And it was a journey that would decide the fate of everyone who ever lived in that compound. That night, when the walls wept blood and the cries of the baby shook the compound, Malam Zubairu did not sleep. He sat in his room, his turban tossed aside, sweat dripping down his wrinkled face. His hands would not stop trembling, and his eyes carried the look of a man haunted by ghosts that no one else could see. Everyone in the compound whispered about what they had witnessed. Some said the house was alive. Some said it was a spirit. Others claimed it was witchcraft. But only Malam Zubairu knew the truth. Only he knew why babies could not live there. He had carried that secret for many years, burying it deep inside him, hoping it would never rise again. But that night, with the child's cries, the past had clawed its way back. It all began many years ago, when Malam Zubairu was still a younger man. He had spent most of his life in the north, trading cattle and hides. He traveled far and wide, from Kano to Sokoto, from Katsina down to Enugu. His life was on the road, and though he earned wealth, he longed for a place to call his own. When he grew older, he returned southward, hoping to settle in Umuaka, his late mother's village. But settling down was not easy. The good lands had already been taken, the fertile soil passed down from father to son. No one was ready to sell. Zubairu searched desperately until one day, he came to the edge of the forest, where the mighty Iroko tree stood. The land there was wide and empty. Birds did not perch on the branches, and the air was always heavy with silence. But to Zubairu, it looked perfect. He asked the villagers about it, but they shook their heads. An old woman named Ngozi pulled him aside and whispered, "That is Ola Ohomio, the land of the evil spirit. No one lives there. Do not even think of it." But Zubairu, hardened by years of wandering, was not easily frightened. "Spirits," he laughed. "If they exist, they cannot harm me. I am a man of prayers. I know how to protect myself." Yet, when he tried to buy the land, the elders refused. "That land does not belong to us anymore," they told him. "It belongs to the spirits. Whoever builds there will regret it." Still, Zubairu did not give up. His desire for land was stronger than their warnings. One evening, he waited until the sun fell and the sky turned red. He walked alone into the forest with nothing but his staff, his prayer beads, and his stubborn will. The Iroko tree stood tall, its trunk wider than a hut. Its bark was scarred with deep marks, as if claws had raked it over and over. The ground around it was bare, no grass dared to grow there. The silence was so thick it pressed against his ears. Zubairu placed his hand on the tree and declared, "This land will be mine. No spirit, no curse, will stop me." The wind rose suddenly, whipping the leaves into a frenzy. He thought it was just the weather, but then he heard it, a voice, low and deep, rising from the roots of the tree. "Do you want this land?" the voice asked. Zubairu's knees shook, but his pride kept him from running. "Yes," he answered. "I want it." The voice laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the trees. "Then you must give something in return. Nothing comes free." Zubairu tightened his grip on his staff. "I will give money, cattle, goats. Whatever is needed." "No," the voice growled. "I do not eat cattle. I do not drink goat's blood. What I want is sweeter." The ground trembled beneath him. The roots of the Iroko shifted as if alive. And then the voice whispered clearly. Bring me the cry of a child. Zubairu staggered backward, his heart racing. No. I cannot give that. Children are innocent. The tree groaned, its back splitting open slightly as if in anger. Then leave. This land is not yours. For the first time in years, fear gripped Malam Zubairu. He fled the forest that night, swearing never to return. But greed is a stronger spirit than fear. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that voice haunted him. Still, the desire for land burned inside him. Then, one night, he made a mistake. He returned to the tree, carrying kola nuts and white cloth, gifts for the unseen being. He knelt and begged, take this instead. Bless me with this land, and I will honor you. The wind hissed, scattering the kola nuts like pebbles. The voice rose again, angry this time. Do not insult me. Only the cry of a child can open this land. Without it, you cannot have it. But Zubairu did not move. He stayed there until midnight, praying under his breath, clutching his prayer beads. Slowly, the air grew colder, and the voice softened. You are stubborn, it said. Very well. I will give you this land. But you must promise me one thing, no child must live here. No cry must pierce these walls. The day a baby's voice rises, my hunger will rise again. And then, silence. When Zubairu opened his eyes, he saw something strange. The ground that had once been dry was now soft, ready for building. The land that had been abandoned for decades suddenly looked alive. It was his. But it came with a price. From that day, Zubairu built his compound carefully, room by room, always remembering the warning. No children. No babies. It was the only way to keep the spirit quiet. For many years, it worked. Tenants came, adults only, and the land remained peaceful. People thought it strange, but no one asked too many questions. Until Hadaise gave birth. The moment the baby cried, the curse that had been sleeping beneath the Iroko tree awakened. The walls wept blood, the air grew heavy, and the spirit demanded what had been promised long ago. That was the truth Malam Zubairu had hidden. That was why he never allowed children in his compound. But now, it was too late. The baby had been born. The promise had been broken. And the spirit would not be silent. The next morning, the compound was filled with fear. Tenants packed their things, whispering to one another. We must leave, one man said. This place is no longer safe. Another muttered, I told you this land was cursed. But Obina refused to go. His wife was weak from childbirth, and moving was impossible. We will stay, he said firmly. I will protect my family. Yet even he could not explain what happened the following night. The baby cried again, as all babies do. But this time, the sound spread beyond the room. It echoed through the compound, louder and louder, until it no longer sounded like a baby's cry but 1,000 voices wailing in unison. Tenants covered their ears. The ground shook. Pots fell and cracked. The Iroko tree groaned as though struck by lightning. Then came the sound of scratching, claws scraping against the walls from the inside. Hadaisa screamed and clutched her child. Obina grabbed a machete, though he knew no blade could fight what was coming. Malam Zubairu rushed in, his face pale, shouting, You do not understand. Once the cry awakens it, nothing can stop it. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. The floor cracked open in the middle of the room. From the gap, a dark mist poured out, twisting and curling like smoke. In the mist, eyes glowed, eyes that were not human. The spirit had risen. The floor split open with a deafening crack. A foul smell rose from the earth, sharp like rotten eggs mixed with smoke. Dark mist curled upward, filling the room, and within it were glowing eyes, eyes that shifted from red to yellow, never blinking, always watching. The tenants screamed, fleeing into the night. Some carried their pots, others clutched only their wrappers. The compound became chaos. Chickens flapped wildly, goats bleated, doors slammed shut, and voices echoed in the rain. But inside Obina's room, there was no escape. The mist thickened, and the baby in Hadaiza's arms cried louder, her tiny body trembling. Obina stood in front of his wife and child, his machete raised though his hands shook. Malam Zubairu dropped to his knees. "I warned you," he cried, his voice breaking. "This is what I feared. The spirit has awoken, and it will not stop until it takes what it was promised." The glowing eyes turned toward him. The mist stretched like hands, reaching for the landlord. He pressed his forehead to the ground, chanting prayers. "Forgive me, forgive me." But the spirit did not want him. Not yet. The mist swirled toward Hadaiza and her baby. The air grew colder, and the newborn's cry turned into a wail so sharp it pierced the ears. The walls shook again, dust falling from the roof, and the blood stains thickened, dripping onto the floor. Then the spirit spoke. Its voice was like 1,000 whispers at once, chilling every bone in the room. "Give me the child." Hadaiza screamed and clutched the baby tighter. Obina stepped forward, his eyes wide with fear but his voice steady. "You cannot have her. She is mine." The spirit laughed. The sound rattled the pots on the shelf and made the window shutters slam open and shut. "You do not know the bargain made on this land. Your landlord promised me the cries of infants. This one is mine." Zubairu wept, beating his chest. "I tried to keep them away. I swore no baby would cross this threshold. Spare us, please." But the spirit hissed. "The promise has been broken. The land is mine again." The mist lashed out, striking the ground, and the crack widened. The whole room shook as if the earth wanted to swallow it. Hadaiza screamed. Obina swung his machete into the mist, but the blade passed through harmlessly. The spirit only laughed again. And then, as suddenly as it came, the mist sank back into the crack. The ground sealed itself shut, the eyes vanished, and silence filled the room. The baby whimpered softly. For a moment, no one moved. The tenants, who had fled outside, crept back in, whispering among themselves. Some called Obina brave. Others called him foolish. All of them looked at Malam Zubairu with hatred. "You knew this would happen," one tenant spat. "You brought us into this cursed place." Zubairu did not answer. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of his years had doubled in that one night. He turned and left without a word, retreating to his own room. That night, no one slept. The next day, the village square buzzed with stories. News of the bloodied walls and the spirit's voice spread like wildfire. The elders summoned Obina, Hadaiza, and Zubairu to explain. Before the gathering, Obina stood tall, though his eyes were tired. "The spirit came for my child," he told them. "It wanted her, but I refused. What curse is this that allows such evil to live among us?" The villagers turned to Zubairu. He was silent for a long time, then finally raised his head. "I did not choose this curse," he said. "It was already here before me. I only agreed to guard it." The elders demanded the full truth, and at last, Zubairu confessed everything: the night under the Iroko tree, the voice of the spirit, the promise he had made to never allow a child's cry to pierce the compound. The crowd gasped. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers muttered curses under their breath. "You sold us all to darkness," an elder spat. "You should have left that land to rot." But before they could punish him, another voice spoke. It was the oldest man in the village, Elder Chokuma, whose skin was wrinkled like dried leather. "It is too late to blame," he said. "The spirit has already awakened. Now we must decide, how do we end this curse before it consumes not only the compound but the entire village?" The elders argued. Some said the land must be abandoned again. Others said a sacrifice must be made. Still others said the Iroko tree must be cut down, though everyone feared such an act would anger the spirits further. Meanwhile, Obinna and Hadassah sat apart, holding their baby. Hadassah's eyes were swollen from crying. "They speak of sacrifices," she whispered to her husband. "Do you think they mean?" Obinna shook his head fiercely. "No. They will not touch our child. I will fight them all if I must." But deep inside, fear gnawed at him. He had seen the spirit's eyes. He had heard its voice. And he knew it would not rest until it had what it wanted. That night, as the village argued, Obinna dreamed. In his dream, he stood again before the Iroko tree. Its roots curled like snakes, and its branches stretched across the sky. From the hollow trunk, the spirit's eyes glowed. "You cannot protect her," it whispered. "She is mine. Her cry belongs to me." When Obinna woke, sweat drenched his body. His baby slept peacefully beside Hadassah, but he could not shake the voice from his mind. The days that followed were tense. The tenants abandoned the compound one by one, refusing to stay in a place cursed by spirits. Soon, only Zubairu, Obinna, Hadassah, and their child remained. The village elders visited, urging them to leave. "This land is doomed," they said. "If you remain, you bring danger to all of us." But Obinna refused. "I will not be chased from my home by shadows," he said stubbornly. Yet every night, the cries returned. Not only the cries of his baby, but strange cries, dozens of them, echoing through the walls, through the trees, through the earth itself. Babies that were not there. Babies that had long been lost. Hadassah began to weaken. Her eyes grew hollow, and she often stared at the walls as if listening to voices no one else could hear. And then, one night, the curse revealed its true power. It was late. The moon was full, casting a pale glow over the compound. The baby slept soundly in Hadassah's arms. For the first time in weeks, there was peace. But suddenly, the silence broke. A sharp knock came at the door. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. Obinna frowned. "Who is it?" he called. No answer. He grabbed his machete and opened the door. But what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing outside were 3 figures. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and in their arms, each one carried a baby wrapped in cloth. But the babies were not alive. Their faces were grey, their mouths open in silent cries. The figures stepped forward, and Obinna stumbled back. Hadassah screamed, clutching her child. The dead had returned. Obinna froze at the door. His hands shook so badly that the machete nearly slipped from his grip. The 3 figures stood silent in the moonlight, their pale faces expressionless, their hollow eyes staring into his soul. Each of them carried a child, babies wrapped in faded cloth, their heads tilted unnaturally, their mouths open as if mid-cry. Hadassah screamed again, holding her baby closer. The sound of her fear seemed to awaken the figures. Slowly, their lips moved. "Give us the child," they whispered in unison, their voices low and cold, like wind moving through a graveyard. Obinna stumbled back, his chest heaving. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figures stepped closer. Their bare feet made no sound on the ground, but every step felt like thunder in Obinna's chest. Their whispers grew louder, blending into a chorus of cries, like the weeping of every lost child that had ever been swallowed by the cursed land. "We are the mothers," the first figure said, her voice trembling. "We are the ones who lost our babies to this place. The land drank their cries. Their souls are trapped here." The second figure lowered her gaze to the sleeping infant in Hadassah's arms. "This one's cry belongs to us now." The third figure stretched out her arms, as if to take the baby. "Give her to us, and the curse will rest." Hadassah's body shook violently. She pressed her back against the wall, whispering prayers in Hausa under her breath. Allah yakiemu. Allah yakiemu. Obinna raised his machete, though he knew it was useless. You will not touch my child, he shouted. At that moment, Malam Zubairu appeared behind them, holding a lantern. His face was pale, his hands trembling. When the light fell on the three figures, his knees buckled. Ya Allah, he whispered. It is them. The mothers of the lost ones. The ghosts turned their heads toward him, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. You remember us, they said. You were the one who made the pact. You promised the cries of our children to the spirit. You let them die. Zubairu fell to the ground, tears streaming down his face. I did not kill them. I only agreed to guard the land. I tried to keep the babies away. Liar, the spirits hissed. Their voices echoed through the compound, rattling the wooden doors and making the ground shake. You let them die, and now their cries feed the spirit. Their blood is on your hands. The lantern flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. The only light was the pale glow from the ghostly children. Obinna could not breathe. He swung his machete wildly, but the figures only drifted back, untouched. Their voices rose again, give us the child. Or she will join the others. Hadiza fainted, her body slumping against the wall, but even in her weakness she did not let go of the baby. The infant stirred, whimpered, and then began to cry. The sound pierced the night like a knife. At once, the ground beneath them trembled again. The crack from the other night reopened, splitting wider this time. Dark mist poured out, carrying with it the spirit's foul voice. The mothers have spoken, it rumbled. Their children were mine. This one will be mine too. The compound shook violently, clay walls splitting, the Iroko tree outside groaning as its branches twisted unnaturally. The ghostly mothers stretched out their hands again, their faces filled with sorrow and hunger. Obinna clutched his machete, but his knees weakened. His mind screamed at him to fight, but his heart whispered despair. What weapon could fight the dead? What strength could stand against an ancient curse born from greed? He looked at Malam Zubairu. The old landlord was weeping like a child, his hands raised toward the dark sky. Spare them. Take me instead, he cried. Take my life, my soul, just spare the child. But the spirit only laughed, its voice like rolling thunder. It is too late for bargains. Too late for mercy. The pact cannot be broken. Suddenly, the door burst open and Elder Chokuma, the oldest man in the village, rushed in with two younger men carrying calabashes filled with white chalk and palm fronds. His voice boomed, "Back, you evil ones. You have no place among the living." The ghost recoiled slightly, hissing as the chalk dust was thrown into the air. Elder Chokuma began chanting in Igbo, his words steady and commanding. Spirits of unrest, return to the dark earth. You shall not feed on this child tonight. For a moment, hope flickered. The mist swirled back, and the ghostly mothers hesitated. Obinna clutched Hadiza and the baby, his heart racing. But the spirit roared with fury. The crack widened further, and a massive root burst from the ground, crashing through the wall. The root twisted like a snake, striking one of the young men and throwing him across the room. He hit the ground with a sickening thud and did not move. The lantern crashed, fire spilling across the floor. The room filled with smoke, cries, and chaos. The spirit's voice boomed again, louder than ever. If I cannot have the cry of the child, then I will have the blood of the village. And at that moment, the earth split wider, swallowing half of the compound in a thunderous roar. Walls crumbled, screams filled the night, and the Iroko tree outside bent low as though bowing to something rising from the pit. What came next would change the fate of Umuoka forever. The earth tore open with a sound like the world itself was breaking apart. Dust and fire filled the air. Obinna clutched Hadiza and their baby, shielding them from falling debris, his ears ringing with the screams of neighbors. The crack spread like a serpent through the compound, swallowing clay walls, tearing through cooking pots, and dragging screaming goats into the pit. From the depths rose a shape, dark, twisted, taller than any man. Its body was made of roots and bones tangled together, its head crowned with thorns, and its eyes burning like firewood embers. The spirit had finally shown itself. The ghostly mothers fell silent and bowed their heads. Their pale forms hovered around the monstrous figure like servants around a king. Elder Chokuma, covered in chalk dust, stood his ground though his legs shook. He lifted his staff high. Spirit of greed and sorrow, he shouted, you will not destroy Mwaka. We banish you back to the pit of the forgotten. The spirit's laugh shook the walls that were still standing. You dare speak banishment to me, old man? I was here before your fathers knew this land. I drank their children's cries. I feasted on their sorrow. You are nothing. A massive root shot from the pit, knocking Elder Chokuma's staff from his hand. It splintered against the wall. The elder fell to his knees, gasping. Obina felt his chest tighten. This was it. The spirit was stronger than them. The ghostly mothers, the endless cries, the cracks in the earth, it was too much. For a brief moment, despair washed over him. He thought of running, of leaving everything behind. But then the baby in Hadaiza's arms wailed again. That sound, it was weak, but it was life. It cut through the spirit's darkness like a knife. Obina. Elder Chokuma's cracked voice rose again. The cry of the living child, it is the only thing the spirit cannot fully claim. Guard her with your life. The spirit roared, its roots whipping wildly. One of the roots struck Malam Zubairu, hurling him against the Iroko tree outside. He groaned, blood running from his mouth. With his last breath, he whispered, "This is my curse, my punishment," before his head fell to the side. The landlord was gone. But the spirit only grew larger, feeding on the death. Its thorny crown stretched higher, its laughter booming. His soul is mine now. As all of yours will be. The villagers who had gathered outside screamed, scattering like dry leaves in a storm. Mothers clutched their children. Men tried to throw spears and stones, but the weapons crumbled to dust before they touched the spirit. Obina grabbed Hadaiza's hand. "We must run." But Hadaiza shook her head, her eyes wide with strange calm. "Obina, if we run, it will follow us. It will follow every child in Umwaka. We must end it here." Her words cut deep. Obina knew she was right. But how could a man with nothing but a machete fight a spirit older than the land itself? Then Elder Chokuma crawled toward him, his face pale, his voice weak but steady. "The spirit was bound here long ago. It feeds on cries and sorrow, but it can be destroyed. You must cut the root that ties it to the earth, the root beneath the Iroko tree. The pact was sealed there. Break it, and the spirit will fall." Obina's eyes shot to the Iroko tree outside. Its trunk twisted violently, its roots glowing faintly with red light. The spirit followed his gaze and let out a furious roar. "No. The tree is mine. None shall touch it." The ground shook, and the pit widened. Roots shot up like snakes, lashing at Obina and Hadaiza. One root wrapped around Obina's leg, pulling him toward the pit. He hacked at it desperately with his machete, sparks flying, until it snapped. He staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. "Go, Obina," Hadaiza cried. She clutched the baby to her chest, shielding her from the dust and fire. "Cut it. Do it now." Obina ran toward the Iroko tree. The spirit's roar followed him, deafening. Roots whipped across his path, slamming into the ground, but he dodged, leaping over cracks and broken walls. Sweat and blood ran into his eyes, but he did not stop. When he reached the tree, he saw it, one massive root glowing like hot coal, pulsing with dark energy. The pact lived inside it. He raised his machete and swung with all his strength. The blade struck, sparks flying, but the root held firm. A screech filled the night, the spirit howling in pain and rage. The ghostly mothers appeared beside him, their faces twisted. "Stop," they wailed. "If you cut it, we will vanish. Our children will never return." Obina's heart ached. Their cries were filled with sorrow, with loss that no man could bear. He saw their pale faces, their lifeless children, and for a moment he faltered. Was it right to erase them forever? Then he heard his babies cry again, weak but alive. The sound pierced through the storm of voices. And Obina knew. His child's life, and the lives of all the children yet to come, were more important than the restless dead. With a scream, he swung the machete again. And again. And again. The root cracked. The spirit shrieked, its massive body writhing, thorns snapping, eyes blazing like fire. The pit roared, flames shooting into the night. The ghostly mothers clutched their babies tighter, their voices rising in a final wail. "Do not forget us." Obina lifted the machete one last time and brought it down with every ounce of strength left in him. The root split in two. A blinding light exploded from the ground, throwing Obina back. The spirit screamed, its body unraveling into smoke and ash. The pit collapsed, swallowing itself. The ghostly mothers dissolved into the air, their cries fading into silence. And then, quiet. The night was still. The fire burned low. The ground no longer shook. The spirit was gone. Obina lay on the ground, his chest heaving, his body trembling. Hadaisa rushed to him, the baby still in her arms. Tears streamed down her face. "You did it, Obina. You saved us." The villagers crept back, their eyes wide with awe. Elder Chokuma, barely standing, raised his hands. "The curse is broken. The land is free." For the first time in decades, silence fell on Umuaka, no wailing, no cracking earth, no ghostly cries. Only the soft sound of a baby breathing, alive and safe. But as the villagers rejoiced, Obina looked at the spot where the ghostly mothers had vanished. Their final words echoed in his mind. "Do not forget us." He knew the curse was broken, but their sorrow still lingered. Their story would never be erased. And deep in his heart, Obina wondered, what if the spirit was not truly gone? What if, one day, the cries began again? For now, though, the night belonged to the living. And for the first time, the landlord's house was filled not with silence, but with the sound of a baby's cry that belonged only to life, not death. The villagers sang praises into the night, their voices carrying hope. And yet, far beneath the earth where no eye could see, something stirred.